to Utah Valley Live. Welcome back to Utah Valley Live. If you've been here before, which would be kind of interesting if you have, because this is the first broadcast in I did it again, broadcast. First time streaming in like 12 years. I'm Kent Working. If you might find me in the archives on YouTube here of different videos on Utah Valley Live, and I'm still getting things set up, so I apologize for all of the problems that we might encounter here, because this is not how we did it 12 years ago. Somehow the industry and the technology have changed since 2013, when Utah Valley Live was simulcasting on AM 1480 and on UtahValleyLive.com. Actually, we used Ustream back then. And what you'll find if you go through the archives on this YouTube channel is you'll see a lot of Pat Sheranian. Pat Sheranian, very well known at the time. I knew her quite well. She was my mother. She passed on in 2017, if you didn't know. And as I was going through some things, I thought, well, there's some things maybe I want to talk about. And so that's what I'm going to try to do, along with the plan is to find some of her old radio programs and put them up here on Utah Valley Live, just to put it in the archive somewhere. There's lots of good shows in the past, people you may recognize, so look through the videos listing at Utah Valley Live. Eventually we'll have UtahValleyLive.com up running again. And just to show you that we are in fact live, here, take a look at this. See? Utah Valley. There we are. Right outside the window. And we'll go back to, again, it's been a while since I've done any of this in this manner. What I'm interested in doing is a series on Utah Valley Live that I might call Utah Valley Live, and specifically around home ownership and some of the other issues about living here in Utah Valley. Eventually I'll touch on things like accessory apartments or mini houses or multifamily dwellings, even homelessness and affordable housing. There's good articles that come up all the time on DesertNews.com, and kind of some interesting comments. I won't get into those today. Today will just be a quick shot, maybe. And I'm starting off this series on living in Utah Valley with Is Home Ownership a Right? Which is different than the rights of home ownership. So perhaps the next episode, and again, still getting this started, don't know when it might be, is the old American dream of home ownership. We'll talk about that more in the next episode, but for now, let's ask the question. I'll ask the question. I'll try and stay away from the royal. Is home ownership, does everyone in the United States have the right to own a home? Well, one would think no, probably not. But it does raise the question of, do we have more home ownership, higher percentage now than we used to? Is it lower now than it used to? Pardon me. And because it is a good question, especially as my children have grown up and their generation, my youngest is 23 now, they look at the home buying situation here in Utah Valley a little bit different than we might have 25 years ago, or when we moved out from Southern California back in 1996, almost 30 years now. And here we are. We lived on the same street in Orem for the last 29 years. And in this house for the last 21 years. So part of the reason we moved up from beautiful Southern California next to the ocean, where I've spent most of my first 40 years of life, was because the housing was no longer affordable. I couldn't. It jumped on us. It jumped on us in the late 80s and put even small 2 or 3 bedroom houses out of reach at the time. Whereas up here, where my mother Pat Shranian lived, and said, "Come on up. There's plenty of jobs up here. It's a great place to live." And it much more affordable. And another thing I won't go into in today's episode, but I will sometime in the future, is kind of a review of the houses I lived in growing up in Southern California, one of which just burned down in the Palisades fire. Anyway, back to the idea of home ownership. The rising generation has a real problem. Very few of them can actually buy a home in the foreseeable future. And because things are priced out so much recently. So it raises the question, do they have the right to own a home? And what does that mean, owning a home? When I say own a home, what do you think of? Picture in your head, home. Well, okay, so technically, a residence can include any number of things. It can be a single-family residence, a freestanding dwelling. It could be a duplex. It could be a fourplex. It could get into a larger apartment complex. And at the same time, it could also include a townhouse, condominium. So there's even a mini home. And I think most people, though, probably when they think of a home, they're probably thinking a single-family house. And those are kind of hard to buy right now. But it raised the question as I started wondering, so what percentage of the United States, owns their own home, whether it be condo, townhouse, or single-family dwelling of some kind? And the answer was, and I pulled these off the interwebs, and which means, take everything with a grain of salt, depending on who you're listening to. But it comes out that 66% of Americans own their own home. Now, in Orem, that's 55%. In Provo, it's 30%. And in Lehigh, it's 70%. And around Utah Valley, it will vary depending on, well, obviously Provo and Orem have major universities, and whereas some of the outlying communities aren't going to have, so they'll have a higher percentage of home ownership. But clearly it's Orem and Provo are lower than the national average, which got me thinking, okay, well, Americans, we have a lot of pride in our country usually, and we think we tend to think we're the best country in the world. And so I started looking up on, I think it was USA Today that I got these. No, U.S. News and World Report had a listing that you can find of home ownership by country, the percentage. So go ahead. You're going to have a little quiz as far as try and guess the country that has the highest percentage of its residents as that own their own dwelling. Now, I could cue music if I was really into it, but I'm not there. Back in the day, when I was broadcasting before it was streaming, because it was just audio on AM 960, which at the time was KFMY. Welcome to AM 960, KFMY, K-Family. That was back in the early 90s. It didn't last very long, but it was a lot of fun. Kazakhstan is the country in their list that has the highest percentage of home ownership at 98%. 98% of people own their own place in Kazakhstan. And I'm sure I play an online game called GeoGuessr, and so I've seen places in Kazakhstan in that game, GeoGuessr. I don't know that I'm ready to move. So number two, the number two country in the world, based on the percentage of home ownership. Now, this one is there is an asterisk next to that, and the asterisk comes because they own their dwelling, but they don't own the land, and that would be China. And 96% of folks in China own their own dwelling, but the state owns all of the land. So it's a little bit different there. Now there's 96%. Serbia comes in at 91%. And then we have Mexico at 80%, Singapore at 87%, Thailand, where I spent a couple of years, at 70%. Now, on some of these, like in Thailand and in Mexico and in Singapore, there are restrictions that make it difficult for an expat or for a foreigner to own land. Not impossible necessarily, but difficult. One of the countries that has the best place to live overall, according to the U.S. News and their survey, was Switzerland, then Japan, United States, Canada, Australia, Sweden, Germany, United Kingdom, New Zealand, Denmark, round out the top 10. So Switzerland, what about Switzerland? Well, only 21% of the housing units in Switzerland are single-family residences. Problem with it has one of the lowest percentages of those in this survey at 42%. And the number one problem is it's kind of expensive. Just like it's expensive to live in what might be the best place in the survey to live. Singapore comes in at number 14 on the best overall place to live. 87% of folks own their own homes, and but less than 10% are single-family dwellings. So you're going to be in an apartment condo type of thing. But it's restricted, and it's expensive. And so, but it is kind of fascinating because with the U.S. coming in with home ownership at 66%, or 65%, sorry, 66% of those are single-family residences. So Canada's right there at 66%, Australia 66%, United Kingdom 65%, New Zealand 64%. So what does that mean? Well, it means that depending on where you live, 1/3 of the folks don't own their own property. Now, it's particularly difficult here, and we'll talk about this another day, but just like we moved up here, we didn't sell a house to move up here, but many folks that live in Southern California or other places in California where the real estate's more expensive than here, sell that property, have a bunch of cash, and then come in here and are able to buy properties which seem like a bargain to them. They're larger, bigger lot size, and less expensive than the property they sold in California. We also have another issue we'll talk about another day, and that is temporary rentals. Your basic Verbo, Airbnb, and also who gobble up a certain number of the properties in a neighborhood. For example, we have, I think within a half mile, 3 or 4 Airbnbs in our neighborhood. And yet, technically, according to Orem City, the only place that you can have a temporary rental is in a business district, not in an R8 zone. But cities are having to deal with the fact that they don't have the ability to police them. Anyway, so that's kind of the whole idea. No, home ownership is not a right. There are rights of home ownership, but it's not a right just to own a home. And So we're going to talk about what that means over this series about, I spent 10 years in the mortgage industry way back when. And so I have a basic understanding of mortgage financing. But what it means to try and approach this idea of home ownership. So for now, I'll be signing off again. I'm Ken Vorkink. This is a series on home ownership, or what I call Utah Valley Live, on Utah Valley Live. So stay tuned or subscribe. That's probably the only way you'll get a notification that we're live, and eventually, the chat room will be open. I need to get up to speed here. But we'll call it good for today.